We touched on this at the top of the broadcast. Today at Bedminster, the former president repeated a familiar claim of his, namely that President Biden was forced off the Democratic ticket.
What they did to him was disgraceful, by the way, and it really is a threat to democracy. It was a coup by people that wanted him out, and they didn't do not the way they're supposed to do it.
That's not only inaccurate, it's also an old refrain from him. As CNN's Tom Foreman reports, it also may be how he and his supporters are trying to lay the groundwork, as they did in 2020, to try and challenge the election if he loses.
A stolen nomination, unconstitutional, illegal. That is how some Republicans are characterizing the Democratic Party's switch from President Joe Biden to Vice President Kamala Harris.
This was a coup of a president of the United States. From any standpoint you look at, they took the presidency away.
This was fundamentally illegitimate.
Their argument? Voters in all those state primaries chose Biden, not Harris, to challenge Republican Donald Trump.
It would be wrong and I think unlawful in accordance to some of these states' rules for a handful of people to go in a back room and switch it out because they don't like the candidate any longer.
But CNN contacted all 50 states and they overwhelmingly said there is no impediment to swapping Harris for Biden on the ballot. And if the GOP files a complaint in court,
I expect that if any court acted in some rogue way, that a higher court, whether that's a state Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court or some federal appeals court, that someone would correct it. There really is no theory that would exclude Kamala Harris from appearing on the ballot.
So why keep pushing the idea? Well, remember in the 2020 election, Republicans raised unproven claims of Biden votes coming from faulty voting machines, undocumented immigrants, dead people, and many raged over the idea Donald Trump lost only because of rule changes to accommodate the pandemic.
We do need an investigation into irregularities, fraud. We do need a way forward together.
Dozens of courts rejected those claims. Biden's win was certified. But for many Trumpers, their belief in a stolen election has never died. So some election watchers think Trump is angling for another excuse in case the vote, again, does not go his way.
We know one thing for sure. Trump never loses. And so if he's not declared the winner of 2024, as in 2020, it must be because he was treated unfairly yet again.
To return to the subject of the Supreme Court, yeah, maybe under some certain circumstances, they might come weighing in late. But legal analysts point out when it comes to who's on the ballot, the courts have largely said let the parties decide, let the ballots be cast, and let the voters make their pick. Anderson.
Foreman, thanks very much. We want to get some perspective on this now from best-selling author and former federal prosecutor Jeffrey Toobin. So is there any legal footing for this argument that it was unconstitutional for Harris to become the nominee?
You know, Anderson, I try to give balanced answers whenever it's possible, but it's really not possible in a circumstance like this. You know, this is a completely open and shut situation. Yes, it's true that the voters voted in the Democratic primaries for Joe Biden. Joe Biden has withdrawn as a candidate. So the delegates who were elected in those primaries now get to pick a different candidate. They have picked Kamala Harris. That's how the Democratic Party rules work. It makes sense. There is no impediment in the Democratic Party to this. And that's the end of the story. There is no legal impediment to Kamala Harris being the nominee in all 50 states.
And just to be clear, I mean, the Constitution, which is what the former president is referring to, he's suddenly very interested in what's unconstitutional. The Constitution does not address the party nomination process, correct?
No, I mean, there is a general provision in the 5th and 14th Amendment that says the government has to act with due process of law, but that applies to the government's behavior. The Democratic Party is a private entity, and in any case, there's no argument that there was an absence of due process here. They had a candidate who won primaries who's not a candidate anymore. They have to pick someone else. They have picked someone else. That is not. There is no constitutional provision that would bar that under any circumstance.
It also, I mean, the Democratic Party has layers and layers of rules and rules and rules. All of this has been thought out actually long before this ever happened.
Right, and going back to when Ted Kennedy challenged Jimmy Carter in 1980, there was a big fight about how delegates could vote at the convention and whether they were bound by the results of primaries. But the key issue to remember also is that the only person who could ever challenge this, the only person who has standing to challenge Kamala Harris's nomination is Joe Biden, because he would be the victim, but he has no interest in challenging it because he is now supporting Kamala Harris. So look, people can make claims, and certainly Donald Trump has made untold thousands of legal claims, both in public and in court filings, that have been rejected over and over again. And no one's going to stop him from making claims. But those of us who try to, inform people about the legitimacy of the claims, this one, there's really no dispute about. The Democratic Party gets to decide who their candidate is, and they've decided on Kamala Harris.